When I was 59 years old, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror one morning getting ready for school, and I noticed something that had been creeping up on me so gradually that I almost hadn't seen it happening. But there it was, undeniable and unavoidable. My hair was thinning. Not dramatically, not in the way that sends you into a panic spiral, but noticeably at my temples and along my part line where I'd always had thick, full hair. As a principal who spent 3 decades on her feet, meeting with parents and students and teachers all day long, my appearance mattered to me not because of vanity, but because it affected how people responded to me. And I could feel this subtle shift in my own reflection starting to affect my confidence. I'd spent all those years helping young people believe in themselves, and here I was facing this very human experience of aging, of change, of loss. I made an appointment with my dermatologist, thinking he would have some answers, some straightforward solution that would restore what I was losing. The dermatologist was kind and thorough, and he diagnosed me with female pattern hair loss, which, as he explained it, happens when hair follicles become sensitive to DHT, which is a hormone derived from testosterone, and the follicles shrink over time in a process called miniaturization. He prescribed Minoxidil, the ingredient in Rogaine, and he told me it was FDA approved and it had clinical backing, and that I should see results within 4 to 6 months if I applied it twice daily. I was hopeful. I filled the prescription, I brought it home to Austin, and I started my regimen with discipline. Because if there's one thing I learned from 28 years of running a high school, it's that consistency is everything. But what happened next surprised me. And honestly, it troubled me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Within the first month of using Minoxidil, my scalp started to feel irritated. It wasn't unbearable, but it was uncomfortable, and I noticed redness around my hairline and behind my ears. By the second month, I developed what I can only describe as peach fuzz on my forehead, which was not a side effect anyone had really emphasized when I started. The Minoxidil itself was expensive too, over $35 a month, and there was this underlying anxiety every time I went to refill it that if I ever stopped using it, all my hair would fall out again because I'd only be maintaining a chemical-dependent state rather than actually healing my hair. I'd spent 3 decades in education studying child development and psychology, and I understood the concept of dependency. And something in my gut was telling me there had to be another way forward. So I did what I always do when I'm facing a problem. I started researching. I pulled out academic journals. I dug into peer-reviewed studies. I was looking for anything that showed real results without the side effects I was experiencing. And that's when I came across something that seemed almost too simple, almost too good to be true, which of course made me skeptical. But the more I read, the more the science started to make sense to me, and it centered on rosemary essential oil as a treatment for hair loss. The pivotal study for me was published in the Skin Med Journal in 2015, and it was a head-to-head comparison between rosemary oil and Minoxidil, conducted over 6 months with 94 participants experiencing androgenetic alopecia. What they found was remarkable. The rosemary oil group showed an equal increase in hair count compared to the Minoxidil group. Let me say that again because it's important. They got the same results with rosemary oil as they did with the pharmaceutical drug. But here's where it gets interesting. The rosemary oil group reported significantly less scalp itching and irritation, which was exactly the problem I was experiencing. The mechanism behind why rosemary works is actually quite beautiful when you understand it. The essential oil contains 2 key compounds, rosmarinic acid and carnosic acid, and these compounds improve blood flow to your scalp, which means better nutrient delivery to your hair follicles. But they also do something more specific. They inhibit 5-alpha reductase, which is the enzyme responsible for converting testosterone into DHT, that hair-killing hormone we talked about earlier. It's the same mechanism that pharmaceutical treatments target, but it's coming from a plant, which felt revolutionary to me at that moment in my life. I made the decision to stop the Minoxidil, and I'll be honest, I was nervous. I was afraid that my hair would fall out, that I'd made a mistake, that I'd been seduced by the promise of natural remedies without understanding the real science. But I had the science. I had the skin med study. So I moved forward with my new protocol, and let me tell you exactly what that protocol looks like because precision matters, especially when you're dealing with essential oils, which are incredibly concentrated plant medicines that demand respect and careful application. I bought a small dark glass bottle of pure rosemary essential oil from a reputable supplier, and I also bought organic jojoba oil to use as a carrier. The reason jojoba is the best choice for a carrier oil is fascinating. Its molecular structure mimics human sebum, which is the natural oil our scalp produces, so it doesn't clog your follicles the way other carrier oils can, and your scalp recognizes it as compatible. I would measure out 5 drops of rosemary essential oil and combine it with 1 tablespoon of jojoba oil in a small glass container. And then I would apply this blend directly to my scalp, focusing on the areas where I'd noticed thinning, which for me was my temples and my part line. The application routine became part of my nightly self-care ritual. I would massage the oil into my scalp for 2 minutes, using my fingertips to create gentle circular motions to enhance circulation. And then I would leave it on overnight. If I was going out during the day, I would apply it for at least 30 minutes before shampooing. The entire cost of this protocol, by the way, was roughly $4 per month once I had the initial bottles, which meant I was spending 90% less than I'd been spending on Minoxidil, and I wasn't experiencing any side effects. But I want to be very honest about what happened in the first month of switching to the Rosemary protocol, because this is where a lot of people give up, thinking they're doing something wrong, when actually they're watching a biological process unfold that's completely normal and necessary. During weeks 2 through 4 of using the rosemary oil, I experienced something called the shedding phase, where my hair loss actually increased temporarily. This happens because your hair follicles are essentially resetting their growth cycle. They're moving from what's called the telogen phase, which is the resting phase, into the anagen phase, which is the active growth phase. And during that transition, loose hairs that were ready to fall out anyway come out. It's not a sign that the treatment isn't working. It's a sign that it is working. Your follicles are waking up. They're getting ready to grow new hair. Understanding this was crucial for me because I remember standing in the shower, seeing more hair coming out than usual, and having that moment of doubt where I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But I'd read enough about the shedding phase to know that I needed to push through it, to trust the process, and to not give up right when things were about to turn around. By the 2nd month, the shedding had slowed down considerably, and by the 4th month, I started noticing something that genuinely moved me. Small baby hairs were beginning to appear at my temples, the exact place where I'd first noticed the thinning 3 years earlier. They were fine, almost downy, but they were there, and they were new growth. By month 6, when I went to see my hairdresser for my regular appointment, she commented without me saying anything that my hair seemed thicker, that the density looked improved, and she asked what I'd been doing differently. I told her about the rosemary oil, and I could see in her face that moment of surprise and recognition, like she was filing away this information for her own future reference, or for clients who came to her with similar concerns. Now, I want to deepen this knowledge because understanding the full science makes you a better advocate for your own health. The 5-alpha reductase enzyme that we mentioned is really the key player in female pattern hair loss. When this enzyme converts testosterone into DHT, that DHT binds to hair follicles in people who are genetically susceptible, and it causes those follicles to miniaturize over time. The follicles get smaller, the hair gets thinner, and eventually the follicles stop producing visible hair altogether. Minoxidil works by extending the anagen phase and potentially increasing blood flow. but it doesn't address the DHT sensitivity issue directly. Rosemary oil, by inhibiting 5-alpha reductase, is actually attacking the root cause of the problem. And when you combine that with improved microcirculation and the stimulation of hair follicle stem cells through rosmarinic acid, you're addressing the issue from multiple angles. But here's where I want to introduce you to an even more powerful protocol. Something I discovered after my initial success with rosemary, and something that's going to be the focus of our next discussion. While rosemary oil was transformative for me, adding peppermint oil to the mix created results that were even more dramatic. There's a 2014 study published in Toxicological Research that examined the effects of peppermint oil on hair growth in mice, and the findings were striking. Peppermint oil increased hair thickness by 300%. Now you might think, well, that's a mouse study. Does it really apply to human beings? But the mechanism it revealed was incredibly important. Peppermint oil increases something called IGF-1, which is insulin-like growth factor 1, a crucial molecule for hair follicle growth and development. So when you combine rosemary oil, which addresses the DHT problem and improves circulation, with peppermint oil, which provides a growth factor boost, you're creating a synergistic effect that's more powerful than either oil alone. When I eventually added peppermint oil to my protocol, I continued with the same basic formula. I took 5 drops of rosemary essential oil, added 3 drops of peppermint essential oil, and combined them with 1 tablespoon of jojoba oil. The application method stayed exactly the same, but the results intensified even further. The baby hairs that had started appearing became thicker and more numerous. Within another 3 months, the regrowth was visible enough that I didn't feel the need to wear my hair in certain styles to hide the thinning. The texture of my hair changed too. It felt stronger, healthier, more resilient. I was sleeping on cotton pillowcases to reduce friction, and I was nourishing my hair from the inside out with a diet rich in omega-3 fatty acids, biotin, and zinc. But the rosemary and peppermint oil combination was the external treatment that made the visible difference. Let me tell you why jojoba oil is so superior as a carrier for this purpose, beyond just the fact that it mimics sebum. The molecular structure of jojoba oil is unique. Unlike many other oils that are triglycerides, jojoba oil is actually a liquid wax ester. And this structure means it has an incredibly similar composition to the sebum that your scalp naturally produces. When you apply it to your hair follicles, your scalp doesn't recognize it as a foreign substance that needs to be broken down or shed away. Instead, it works harmoniously with your existing biological processes. It penetrates the hair shaft without leaving a greasy residue. It doesn't clog pores, and it supports the natural pH balance of your scalp. I tried several other carrier oils during my research, including coconut oil and argan oil. And while they're fine products, they didn't create the same kind of sustained results that jojoba provided. With coconut oil, I found my scalp became slightly congested after a few weeks. With argan oil, there was a subtle oiliness that didn't fully absorb. But with jojoba, there was this seamless integration, like I was just giving my scalp what it was already trying to do on its own. The timing of application matters too. And I want to be very specific about this because details matter when we're talking about health. Applying the oil at night allows your scalp 8 hours of uninterrupted absorption and stimulation. Your body's natural circadian rhythms support healing and regeneration at night, and your hair follicles are actually more receptive to growth factors during certain times of your sleep cycle. If you apply the oil at night and leave it on while you sleep, you're working with your body's natural biological rhythms rather than against them. However, I understand that not everyone has the lifestyle flexibility to leave oil on their hair overnight. If that's your situation, a minimum of 30 minutes is crucial. The essential oils need time to penetrate and begin their work at the follicle level. A 5-minute application simply isn't enough time for the active compounds to do their work. As a health coach, I've learned that the most important factor in any health protocol is adherence, and consistency is what creates results. I applied my rosemary and peppermint oil blend every single night for 6 months before I started to see significant changes. I didn't miss days. I didn't skip weeks. I treated it with the same importance I'd given to teaching a class or running a staff meeting. There were nights when I was tired or traveling for a conference, but I kept going because I understood that my hair was rebuilding itself at the cellular level, and that process requires consistent support. This is why I want to distinguish between efficacy and effectiveness. A treatment can be efficacious, meaning it works in a controlled study, but if you don't use it consistently, it won't be effective in your life. Both dimensions matter. Now, I do need to address some important safety considerations because these are potent plant medicines and they deserve respect. Essential oils should never be applied directly to your skin undiluted. This is non-negotiable. Always use a carrier oil. Dilution isn't making the treatment weaker. It's actually making it safer and more effective because it allows the essential oils to be absorbed gradually and sustainably by your scalp, rather than causing irritation or overwhelming your skin. You should always do a patch test before beginning any new oil protocol, especially if you have sensitive skin. Apply a small amount of your diluted blend to the inside of your elbow or behind your ear and wait 48 hours to make sure you don't have any allergic reaction. If you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you should avoid rosemary and peppermint essential oils on your scalp, as both compounds can have systemic effects. If you're taking any medications, particularly blood thinners or heart medications, you should consult with your healthcare provider before beginning this protocol, because some essential oils can interact with medications. Quality matters tremendously when you're working with essential oils. Buy from suppliers who can provide certificates of analysis, who test their oils for purity and potency, and who can tell you where their plants were sourced and how the oils were extracted. The cheapest option is rarely the best option when it comes to essential oils because quality directly impacts efficacy. I spent a little more on my rosemary and peppermint oils than I would have on the bargain brands, and I've never regretted that investment. You're paying for authenticity, for proper extraction, for plant material that was grown and processed with care. As I wrap up this discussion, I want to acknowledge what moved me most deeply about this journey. For decades, I taught young people about the importance of evidence and critical thinking. And here I was in my 60s facing a health challenge that conventional medicine had one answer for. And that answer was creating problems as fast as it was solving them. But when I looked at the science, when I did my own research, when I trusted my instincts about what felt right for my body, I found a path forward that was gentler, more affordable, and ultimately more effective. The rosemary oil didn't just regrow my hair, it restored my sense of agency in my own health. It reminded me that there are often multiple valid approaches to solving the same problem, and that sometimes the answer we're looking for is found not in the newest pharmaceutical, but in the ancient wisdom of plants that humans have been using for thousands of years, now backed up by modern science. In our next conversation, I want to dive deeper into the synergistic power of combining multiple essential oils for hair growth. We're going to talk about the specific protocol of rosemary and peppermint together, the exact ratios I use, how to layer these oils with other treatments, and how to recognize whether you're in the shedding phase or whether something else is happening with your hair. We're also going to discuss how this protocol works differently for different types of hair loss, whether it's female pattern baldness or telogen effluvium or alopecia areata, because the underlying mechanisms are different and your approach needs to account for that. I'll be sharing more of my personal story, and I'll be walking you through what I call the hair growth timeline, so you'll know exactly what to expect and when to expect it, which is so critical for staying motivated and committed to the process. Thank you so much for joining me today, and for trusting me with your concerns about your hair and your health. This is the work that matters to me most, helping women navigate the changes that come with aging and finding the paths that are grounded in both science and in compassion for ourselves. If you found this valuable, I'd love for you to share it with someone who's struggling with hair loss, because the isolation of these experiences often keeps us quiet when we could be supporting each other through them. And remember, your hair is a living extension of your overall health. So as you nourish it with these oils, you're also participating in a broader practice of wellness and self-care that affects every dimension of your life.